The Druids' groves are gone, so much the better. Stonehenge is not, but what the devil is it? Stonehenge has left people mystified for centuries over the true purpose of these large stones that stand on the edge of Salisbury Plain in Wiltshire, England. Estimated to be around 4,500 years old, they are older than the Great Pyramids of Egypt and the Roman Empire. But who built Stonehenge? And were these stones used as a sacrificial altar for the Druids? Maybe a Roman clock? Or could they be a Neolithic calendar? The list of ideas goes on and on, but what makes them even more fascinating is their ties to aliens, the paranormal, and other strange events. You see, there have been reports of UFOs, apparitions, strange light, levitation, and bizarre weather conditions. Today we will look at the history of these stones and the events that have supposedly unfolded around them over the years. The whole area is much more than a circle of stones, as it actually has over 700 archaeological features that include timber structures, burial mounds, henges and other enclosures. It is a treasure trove for historians, with Stonehenge being written about as early as 1135 by Geoffrey of Monmouth, who claimed the stones were brought over from Africa to Ireland by giants. He then wrote about Merlin the Great Wizard having had them flown across the sea to where they stand to this day. The site is made up of two different types of stone, bluestones and sarsens, neither which can be found locally. The bluestones are thought to have come from the north flank of the Preseli Mountains in Wales, which baffles the mind as this is about 240 miles away from Stonehenge and they weigh around 4 tons each, and about 80 were used at the site. The outer ring of the giant sarsen stones came from Marlborough Down, which is 20 miles north of the location at around 1600 BC. Now these stones can weigh up to 50 tons each. The original thought was that the ancient Druids built Stonehenge, but in more recent times this idea has been replaced with the late Neolithic Becker people being the builders. It is believed that the stones would have been carried by raft around the coast of Wales to Bristol, then gradually transported up the local rivers before finally being positioned on rollers to ease the carrying of such heavy items to their final resting place at Stonehenge, where they were positioned to form 2 circles. Construction is thought to have started around 3500 BC over a course of 1500 years and in 3 different phases. The first stage was the construction of the circular bank and ditch that contained the Aubrey stones, named after John Aubrey, who wrote about the stones in Monumenta Britannica. The second stage came around 200 years later, and this is where the blue stones were transported over from Wales. Not long after they were erected, they were taken down and replaced with the huge stones seen today, and re-erected. It was 1500 years later, after the first stone was laid, that the final changes took place, and once more the blue stones were moved to the inside circle where you can see them today. It was also around this time that the altar stone made from green sandstone from Milford Haven in Pembrokeshire was set up too. Can you imagine the amount of work it took these people and the level of craftsmanship? Now this is some serious achievement. I mean, without modern tools, would we have any idea today how to accomplish such a task? So, as you can imagine, it left people wondering years later if it was some kind of sorcery that had created the area. The Saxons were apparently the ones who named the stones as Stonehenge, or hanging stones, as the stones appeared to float. A 17th century architect named Inigo Jones felt that after studying Stonehenge, it had to have been a Roman temple. But by the 18th century, this idea was tossed aside by a Freemason named William Stuteley, who felt that the area was really a temple of the British Druids. But by the 20th century, a more thorough understanding of Stonehenge came to light, with the real age of the location. Over the years, prehistoric remains have been discovered in the area that show cattle was left to graze here. People grew crops and worshipped their gods. Although all we can do is speculate as to what the area was used for, there is evidence left behind that indicates possible functions. You see, there is evidence of cremation burials which show that funerals were carried out at Stonehenge. It's also possible that during midsummer solstice, the first Stonehenge was intended to catch the sun's rays on the remains left buried here, and that as the sun rose between the heel stone and another stone which is no longer there, the Aubrey stones would represent entrances to the underworld. Others believe that the location was used as a calendar to chart the seasons or map the stars for religious purposes. But maybe we'll never know their real purpose. But that hasn't stopped strange events taking place, and some are terrifying. Sir Michael W.S. Bruce wrote to the Evening Standard in 1953 about his experience during World War II with 3 of his comrades. They were exercising on the plains driving to Stonehenge by jeep when they witnessed a small aircraft flying over at them at a very low altitude. Suddenly, the group were left horrified as they saw the plane crash into some trees by the side of the road. Now, as you can imagine, the soldiers ran over to the crash site but discovered nothing. There was no sign of the plane, no bodies, no debris. It was as if they'd imagined the whole experience. But then things got even stranger as the warrant officer rang them. He was standing where the plane had disappeared, and sitting there was a memorial commemorating the deaths of the first ever members of the Royal Flying Corps who died in 1912 while on duty. Is this what the men had seen that night? A ghostly shadow of a tragedy that killed 2 pilots long ago. In 1971, a story goes that a group of hippies were camping within the stone circles. Well, one night a really terrible thunderstorm took place across the plains. A storm so vicious that trees and the sarsen stones were struck with lightning. At this point, a strange blue light is said to have illuminated the circle of stones. So intense was this light that a policeman and farmer who were in the location had to look away. Anyway, as the lightning struck, a loud bang was heard, along with the sound of screaming coming from the travellers. But as the policeman and farmer went to assist them, all they discovered was a campfire that was still burning and smoking tent pegs. The people and their tents were gone, and no one has ever seen them again. People believe that if this tragedy did occur, that the energy from the storm combined with the power of 14 ley lines that crisscrossed the location managed to produce a vortex that sucked the poor group of travellers into it along with their tents. There have been many people who have written about Stonehenge over the years, and while doing so have spoken to people who have experienced something strange. Paranormal author J.A. Higgins wrote about a security guard who saw a shadow man walking amongst the stones late one night. He heard singing coming from the circle, as well as whispering voices, but upon investigation he discovered there was nothing there. Other guards said they'd heard a weird electrical humming sound, which again had no explanation. Another author named M.J. Wayland wrote about a man who was stationed at Stonehenge in 1972, a year after the vortex incident had occurred. At the time, the area was completely accessible to the public, so the army kept a watchful eye over it to keep vandals at bay. 2 soldiers were patrolling the area one night, and by 2 a.m. it was deserted. Now, these 2 young men had heard from their colleagues about a strange lady in white that had been seen gliding amongst the stones earlier that week, but they were both sceptical and even laughed about the story. That is, until the situation went from amusing to downright terrifying. As the early hours of the morning rolled around, one of the soldiers decided to take a quick nap on top of their Land Rover while the other stood guard. But a restful nap was not what he ended up having, as his colleague was heard screaming his name in horror. Rubbing his eyes, half asleep, the young man came to, when he suddenly realised what his friend was shouting about. He was floating above the vehicle. As the shock engulfed him, he suddenly dropped back down onto the roof of the car. They couldn't explain what they'd experienced. I mean, how can you explain something like that? Levitation. It seems the young men never discussed the event after this, deciding that they would also not sleep again while working their shift. The story was only released anonymously after one of the men had died. 2 security guards are said to have been at Stonehenge one evening when they described seeing a strange blob of light that was floating towards the monument. They thought it may well be a weather balloon at first due to its shape, but then it suddenly started to change. Spikes of light would shoot from the blob and it would suddenly change direction, floating above the site before suddenly disappearing. Many believe this was an alien interaction. Now, it is worth noting here that the armed forces do carry out exercises in this area, so maybe flares or helicopter lighting is the cause of the strange sight, but reports say the witnesses are highly credible and what they experienced that night affected them. So it may not stand as grand as I'm sure it once was, but the power and impression it still holds says a lot for Stonehenge. Overall, it's believed that its purpose was likely religious, with many who see the summer solstice at dawn from this location being left in awe. Throughout the year, access to the monument is restricted to protect it from modern tourists and vandals, but visitors have still reported strange sightings around this ancient site, including small apparitions moving amongst the sarsen stones, the ghost of a dog guarding the area, and even Bigfoot type creatures have been seen walking in the local fields. But what are your thoughts on this historic location? Do you believe that spirits haunt here? Was it really an echo of a plane that crashed here long ago? Did the soldier really levitate above his vehicle? So many strange and unexplainable events occurred here that surely there must be some truth amongst the legends. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It was certainly an interesting location to research, and if I had to say my thoughts, I believe that the ghost plane is likely true, as well as other tales of strange lights. If the group of travellers really did get pulled into a vortex, you can only imagine the horrors they witnessed on the other side. Please consider showing the channel some love with a like or subscribe so that you don't miss out on future haunted locations. Until next time, my friends, stay safe out there.